Welcome, I'm Brian Ross, Chief Investigative Correspondent for ABC News. Today, a rare inside look at what has long been covered by a veil of secrecy, the activities of the American companies that have received multi-million-dollar contracts to operate in Iraq, doing jobs that were once carried out by the military, what some call the subcontracting or the outsourcing of the war. Today in Washington, the families of the 4 men killed in that gruesome Fallujah ambush in 2004 went before Congress to demand accountability from the company their loved ones worked for, a company called Blackwater Security USA. 2 of the women, Katie Helvenston and Donna Zofko, say they've been stonewalled by Blackwater, but on their own have found some disturbing information about what happened to their sons that day in Fallujah. The first thing they discovered was that their sons were sent out on the dangerous mission without heavily armored vehicles.
In a cheap Mitsubishi. Their armament, what they had for armament on that vehicle? A reinforced back bumper. That was their armored vehicle.
The importance of an armored vehicle in Iraq can be seen in this remarkable video, taken of an actual attack from inside an armored vehicle.
Go, go, go! Go, go, go! Go!
The armored SUVs drive right through the attack. No one was hurt.
You're all right. Everybody's good. We're good. Everybody's good.
This was not the kind of vehicle Blackwater sent Scott Helveston out in.
I'm a very forgiving person, but I don't think I will ever forgive them for that. And I think it was all about greed and the dollar.
Under its contract for the mission, there also were supposed to be 6 men in the detail, 3 for each car. But as can be seen in this video taken by the attackers, Blackwater only sent 2 men for each car, leaving the rear gunner lookout post empty.
These insurgents were able to walk right up to him and shoot him point blank with small arms weapons.
Dan Callahan is the lawyer for the families in their lawsuit, which alleges that Blackwater's interest in the bottom line led to the wrongful death of the men.
They didn't give them the proper training. They did not allow them to go on the runs to determine what the proper routes are.
The lawyer says Blackwater also failed to provide maps or radio contact with the U.S. military, which may explain why the convoy missed a critical turn that morning. Instead of taking the road around Fallujah, the men headed straight into one of the most dangerous places in the world for an American.
Can you imagine being sent into Fallujah without a map?
When you learned that, what did you think?
I threw up. I literally threw up.
The mothers are now suing Blackwater, and Blackwater has countersued, saying it serves an important function in Iraq and that the men who work for it understand the risks. It is but one of the many contractors whose activities are being questioned now. Take a look at this picture. A young man in Baghdad with a submachine gun posing next to millions of dollars in cash. His name is Willem Marks, and today he is here, now working for ABC News and prepared to let us in on just what he was doing with that gun and all that money. Willem, welcome.
Thank you, Brian.
What were you doing in Baghdad with all that money and the gun?
I was working as a summer intern for a company called the Lincoln Group based out of Washington that was operating as a propaganda arm of the US military, predominantly based out of Baghdad.
And what was your job?
I was a go-between between US soldiers writing storyboards, as they call them, and Iraqi newspaper editors who would run the stories as hard news after being paid.
You used that cash to pay them?
Yes, I did.
And how much would you pay an editor of a newspaper?
It would depend on the quality of the newspaper, but anything from around $50 up to $2,000 for a very good one.
So you went around Baghdad with bags of cash?
Yeah, more or less. Often it was Iraqi employees doing it for us because it was very dangerous for Western contractors like myself to travel. But occasionally, yes, we would carry the money around in cars.
So you were one of those contractors there, and your job was essentially to get the press releases written by the U.S. Army in the Iraqi newspapers.
Yes, and it was even more covert than that. They weren't even press releases. They were construed as real news articles. And under a misapprehension, I'd applied for this job with this company and ended up doing this kind of work, which, I found slightly objectionable.
You're 24 now. You were 22 then. How did you get that job, and what were your qualifications? Did you have a background in journalism?
No, not really. I was coming to the end of my undergraduate degree back in the United Kingdom, and a cousin of mine in the US told me this company was offering internships in Baghdad. I was going to start a master's in journalism over here in New York, and decided that it would be a great opportunity to spend the summer in Iraq to try and understand what was really happening there. And so I applied for the job.
And you got it?
I did. For some reason, the company thought that my experience of having been to Syria a couple of times qualified me to work in a conflict zone like Baghdad.
And what about the cash? There's been testimony this week in Washington about billions of dollars in cash that went missing, can't be accounted for. What about the cash you had? Was anybody keeping a close eye on it?
It wasn't that well accounted for, I have to say. The Iraqi employees had a basic accounting system, but while I was there, I certainly learned that Iraqi employees were skimming large amounts of cash from the contracts that we worked on. And since US hard currency is, the only form of currency available really in Baghdad that's reliable, these huge shipments you see now appearing on, committee reports are just very common, I think, when I was there.
You've seen those pictures really of pallets of US currency shipped into the war zone with billions of dollars missing. I take it that doesn't come as a surprise to you.
Not really. I think of people like me driving around large amounts of cash, utterly unqualified, no security clearance. I think more unscrupulous characters, as we've seen in the last couple of years, will no doubt have been given charge of even larger amounts of cash.
And what does the Lincoln Group say about what you are saying now? I know you wrote an article for Harper's Magazine.
Well, I wrote the article and they declined to really comment specifically on anything that they considered inaccurate, and they claimed client confidentiality with the US military prohibited them from making any corrections.
So they said there were inaccuracies, but they wouldn't say what they were.
Exactly.
And you stand by your story?
I entirely do, yes.
Well, we're glad you're here now working for a real journalism organization,
Thanks,
ABC
Brian.
News. Thanks very much, Willem. Continuing coverage and updates can be found on our website called The Blotter, located at abcnews.com. I want to hear what you have to say about our reports. Send us your video comments or questions. Just go to the Brian Ross and the investigative team website at abcnews.com and click on Ask Brian Ross. For all of us at the ABC News investigative team, thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon on the web.